Right. What time is it? What time are we living in? That's the first question that I want to leave open with you today. One thought is this: we're living in a time when there's a lot of turmoil in the world. Can we agree with that? I don't care if I care if you're a Christian or not, but whether you are a Christian or not, everybody can agree on this. This world is pretty messed up. This world, which has a lot of beautiful things, also has a lot of ugly things. Now, do you remember Bart? So those of you know Bart is one of our church members. He calls me and says, "Paul." I won't do it. Okay, Paul. Okay, sorry. If you see him, you'll know what I just did. But anyway, he don't care. He knows I make fun of him all the time. But he said, "What is your midget cousin doing over there?" What are you talking about? My midget cousin. I know this guy doesn't like Trump. Are you talking about Trump? He's not that small. Okay, he's not. You can't really call him a midget. And he said, "No, I'm not talking about that." I found out later he's talking about Kim Jong-un, right? And how he blew up. He did some nuclear testing this week. Also, it is 9/11, and if you remember the name Al-Qaeda. Right now, the name that's going around for that kind of turmoil is ISIS, is it not? Right? And ISIS, from my read, was the Iraqi version of Al-Qaeda, right? Later on, it incorporated Syria, and so it became Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, and it's called a whole bunch of different names as well. And there's a guy named, do you know who the leader? Do you know who the leader of ISIS is right now? Yeah, his name is Big Daddy. Did you know that? I was so surprised. This is his name right here. I told you. Okay, Abu Omar al-Big Daddy. No, right? Okay, I know. It's actually Baghdadi, right? But say it a little fast, you get Big Daddy, is what that is, right? How fitting. How fitting. But in any case, so the story that we are going to read, even though it's written so long ago, is very relevant to us because this was a time in the history of Israel where there was a lot of oppression going on. And the enemy state at that time was Syria, right? It fits well, right? Islamic State in Syria. So anyways, Syria, and they were having there was a lot of tension. It was a time of war and peace, but a forced peace, an oppressive peace, because Syria was oppressing Israel. And God had given Syria victory over Israel. In his timing, Israel needed to be disciplined, and that's what was going on at that time. The person through whom God gave victory to Syria over Israel was a man named Naaman, who was a general of the nation of Syria. And the story that we have here is a story of him coming to Israel, to Elisha the prophet, to get healing for an incurable disease. It's like the Big Daddy over there, let's say. He comes to America and visits Billy Graham and asks him to pray for him. Something like that. Can you imagine that? Right? So that's what's going on here in this story. Now, I brought a book called The Message, and this is basically the Bible translated kind of in a very, very loose sense. It's the Bible basically in story form. So I would never tell you to use this as your main Bible. It's really not a Bible. It is a person's interpretation of the original languages of the Bible. So having said that, even though it is not the Bible as such, he has written, Eugene Peterson, the author, has rewritten the Bible in very easy to understand form. So it's fun. And it's easy to follow if you read stories like this in this book called The Message. So I would encourage you not to substitute your Bible for this, but whenever you find your Bible difficult, something you don't understand, going back to something like this can really help. Now, I'm going to be reading all of chapter 5, But this, as I said, this is written in very much a story style, and I'm going to pause as we go. It's going to take a little bit of time, but stay tuned, be in tune. This is story time, right? Everybody stays awake for story time, right? Yes? I hope so, because if I lose you in this story time, then I don't have you for the rest of our time. And please, I don't want us to waste our time here today. All right, it's story time. Naaman was general of the army under the king of Aram, which is another way to say Syria here. He was important to his master, who held him in the highest esteem, because it was by him that God had given victory to Aram. Pause there. Notice that it is God who is giving victory. Jehovah God, Israelite God, who is giving victory to the enemy of Israel, right? Ultimately, God is in control of some things? No, everything. So it is appropriate to say that even when tragedies happen in our lives, ultimately they are happening in the hand of my loving Father. That He allowed it for His good purposes for us and for His glory. Now, moving on. He was a truly great man, but he was affected with a grievous skin disease. It so happened that Aram, on one of its raiding expeditions against Israel, captured a young girl who became a maid to Naaman's wife. One day she said to her mistress, "Oh, if only my master could meet the prophet of Samaria, he would be healed of his skin disease." So Naaman went straight to his master, the king, and reported what the girl of Israel had said. "Well then, go," said the king of Aram, or Syria, "and I'll send a letter of introduction to the king of Israel." So he went off, taking with him about, check this out, 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and 10 sets of clothes. Naaman delivered the letter to the king of Israel. The letter read, "When you get this letter, you'll know that I've personally sent my servant Naaman to you. Heal him of his skin disease." When the king of Israel read the letter, he was terribly upset, ripping his robe to pieces. He said, "Am I a God with the power to bring death or life? Did I get orders to heal this man of his disease? What's going on here?" Yeah, that's what it says here, actually. What's going on here? That king is trying to pick a fight. That's what. The king of Israel is freaking out because he figures that his enemy king wants to fight and has sent his best general to pick one. Elisha, the man of God, heard what happened, that the king of Israel was so distressed that he ripped his robe to shreds. He sent word to the king, "Why are you so upset, ripping your robe like this? Send him to me, so he'll learn that there's a prophet in Israel." And this is important. He'll learn this, in a sense, this is the point. There is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman with his horses and chariots arrived in style and stopped at Elisha's door. Check this out. Elisha sent out a servant to meet him with this message. "Go to the river Jordan, immerse yourself 7 times, your skin will be healed, and you will be as good as new." Naaman lost his temper. He turned on his heel, saying, "I thought he'd personally come out to meet me, call on the name of God, wave his hand over the disease spot, and get rid of the disease." You know, you've all seen the TV kind of thing where, be healed, the type of deal, something fancy, all right? Something like with something incorporating candles or something like that, or at least some oil, all right? Okay. The Damascus rivers, Abana and Parfar, are cleaner by far than any of the rivers in Israel. A little bit of racism here. Why not bathe in them? I'd at least get clean. And to be fair, Jordan is kind of muddy, okay? He stomped off, mad as a hornet. But his servants caught up with him and said, "Father, if the prophet had asked you to do something hard or heroic, wouldn't you have done it? So why not this simple wash and clean?" So he did it. Naaman listened to his servants and did it. He went down and immersed himself in the Jordan 7 times, following the orders of the holy man. His skin was healed. It was like the skin of a baby. He was as good as new. He then went back to the holy man. He and his entourage stood before him and said, I know now beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is no God anywhere on earth, no God anywhere on earth other than the God of Israel. In gratitude, let me give you a gift. As God lives, Elisha replied, the God whom I serve, I'll take nothing from you. Naaman tried his best to get him to take something, but he wouldn't do it. If you won't, so this type of thing. Whenever anybody went to any god, there was always a prophet fee. Do you see? So the healing was bought for a fee. He brought 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and changes of clothing to secure that healing for his incurable disease. But what is Elisha doing? He's making a difference between God of Israel and every other god. The favor of God, the goodness of God cannot be bought at a price. Cannot be bought by human effort or human goodness of any sort. God's goodness is not for sale. That's why it's by grace. That's why you see grace appearing here as it is. If you will take nothing, said Naaman, let me ask you for something. Give me a load of dirt, as much as a team of donkeys can carry, because I am never again going to worship any god other than God. But there's one thing of which, so what he's doing is taking dirt. He's going to make an altar where he is from the dirt of Israel, because Jehovah God is the God of Israel, and he's going to worship Jehovah God where he is. And check this out. But there's one thing for which I need God's pardon. When my master, the king, leaning on my arm, enters the shrine of Rimmon and worships there, and I'm with him there, worshiping Rimmon, may you see to it that God forgive me for this. Not my heart, not my true devotion, but when my king is leaning on my hand and I bow with him in the temple of Rimmon, may God forgive. May the God who knows my heart forgive. I love that. And Elisha says, no, all or nothing, buddy. If there's only one God, you need to worship him. Is that what he says? No. Amazingly, he says, everything will be all right. Go in peace. I love that too. But he hadn't gone far. Check this out. This guy named Ghazi, servant to Elisha, the holy man, said to himself, my master has let this Aramean, the Syrian, Naaman, slip through his fingers without so much as a thank you note? By the living God, I'm going after him to get something or other from him. And Gehazi took off after Naaman. Naaman saw him coming running after him and jumped down from his chariot to greet him. Is something wrong? Well, nothing's wrong, but something's come up. My master sent me, he's lying, my master sent me to tell you, 2 young men just showed up from the hill country of Ephraim, brothers from the seminary there. Supply their needs with a gift of 75 pounds of silver. You need 75 pounds of silver to feed 2 people? 75 pounds of silver and a couple of sets of clothes. Naaman said, of course, how about 150 pounds? Naaman insisted. He tied up the money in 2 sacks and gave him the 2 sets of clothes. He even gave him 2 servants to carry the gifts back with him. When they got to the fort of the hill, Gehazi took the gifts from the servants, stored them inside, and sent the servants back, presumably before Elisha had a chance to see it. He returned and stood before his master. Elisha said, so what have you been up to, Ghazi? Nothing much, he said. Elisha said, didn't you know? So Elisha gave him a chance to fess up. He didn't take it. Elisha said, didn't you know I was with you in spirit when that man stepped down from his chariot to greet you? Tell me, is this a time to look after yourself, lining your pockets with gifts? Naaman's skin disease will now infect you and your family with no relief in sight. Gehazi walked away, his skin flaky and white like snow. Wow. Interesting story, you know? Joseph, fun, right? Yeah. All kinds of details, disease and intrigue and healing and all that. Good stuff. All right. So what time is it? Do you understand why I'm asking this question? The question is asked here. What time is it? Elisha understood the times that he was living in. Gehazi didn't get it. And my heart is that you would understand the times you are living in and that you would truly get it, that you would not miss it, that you would discern the time. And you understanding what time it is, that would color every way, every other area of your life. And that's my heart for you today. Okay, so what is the point? What is the point of this whole story that is going on here? The point is this, that there is no God but God. There is no God but Jehovah God. And he is present in his spokesperson, Elisha. There is no God but God, and he has a prophet. He has a person who speaks for him. Okay? That's the message that is here. That's the point. That's the message to be delivered to the times that Elisha was living in. That there is a God, that he can be known. That he has spoken, and he speaks through his prophet. That's the point. Are you with me? You understand the point now of the story? That there's no other God, no other God. Sure, there are gods, there are demons, there are authorities, all of those things, but compared to the true God, in the light of the true God, there is absolutely no other God, no God to be worshipped, no God to be acknowledged, let alone worshipped. Okay? That's the message, and that's the message that Elisha the prophet wants to impress on the heart, the head and the heart, and the life of this foreign general, Naaman. That's the point. There is no other God at all. Some of that is drawn out by a few factors in this story. I need you to have that story embedded in your head because I'm going to be referring to it a few times. Where is it said here that there is no other God? Notice from the get-go, right? Who is the one who has given Israel into the hand of Aram or Syria? God. God is the one who has done that. Ultimately, who is the one who has allowed 9/11 and all the tragedies that occur in our lives? Our God is big enough to handle it. Our God is the one who has written it into his story. And there is no other God. There is no other God. Naaman also, when he recognized this, he says this. He doesn't say that God is the greatest God among all gods. He said there is no other God, and all other gods, including Rimmon, the God of my nation, is not God. Only Jehovah, only the God of Israel is the true God. Naaman makes that confession himself. Okay. So that's the point of the story. There is no other God but Jehovah, and Jehovah speaks through his prophet. Jehovah speaks through his prophet. There is a prophet in Israel. There is one who speaks for God in Israel. That's another point, right? The servant of Naaman, the girl, servant of Naaman's wife, the maid, she said that there is a prophet. That's the point. There is a prophet, that God is not a God who is far away, but a God is a God who speaks, and he speaks through his prophet. And if you go to him, that prophet can speak on your behalf to God, and he can grant you healing for you. He can do that. That God is the only God, and he speaks through his servant. He has a prophet. He speaks. God is a God who speaks. Let's reflect on Jesus' life for just a moment. Jesus has a reference to this, and I want you to see this. Besides Big Daddy, okay? Jesus is making reference to Naaman's story. Let me give you a little bit of background. Jesus is preaching. He is prophesying. He is God's prophet as he speaks in his own hometown. And in his own hometown, hearing that their boy has become a famous preacher, is excited to hear his message. But then he gets to a point in his message and he says this, look, Ultimately speaking, my hometowners, you all are not going to be accepting me. In fact, Israel is going to have a hard time with me. But it seems in God's plan that non-Israelites are going to be receiving the good news. And this is what he says. There were many lepers in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed. This is Jesus saying this. But only Naaman the Syrian. And when they heard these things, they were filled with wrath. And check this out. They took Jesus, took him to the edge of a cliff, and they were going to throw him over and kill him. That's the level of racism right there. You think America is the only place where there's racism? You think LA is the only place there's racism? Many of you have been abroad in the world. Racism is in your face everywhere you go. Liberal Europe is in your face over there. We're very sensitive to it. We're sensitive to the slavery that is in our past. We're sensitive to these things. And so racism is very prominent right now. But we're not the only ones. You think Koreans are not racist? You think Japanese are not racist? You think any nation is? Of course. And sometimes it gets mixed up with nationalism. But you can be nationalistic. You can be very grateful for what you have and who you are without being hateful. But the Jews of this time, when they heard that the good news was ultimately to go out to the nations, they couldn't handle it. They got really upset. And that's another unique thing about this story, you see. God is the God not only of the people of Israel, but everybody everywhere, including the enemies of Israel. God rules over everything and everyone. As Abraham Kuyper, one scholar, said, there is not an inch of all creation over which Jesus does not cry out, mine. It all belongs to him. It's his. It still is my Father's world. Can I get an amen? Yeah. And what's magnificent about this story is that not only is God the God of all of the nations, God is the Savior of all of the nations. That's what Jesus is saying here, right? That the good news that I bring is not to be limited to my hometown, to Israel, but is to go out to the whole world. In the book of Isaiah, God also made this promise. He said to the Messiah, you are too good for you to be used only for my people. I want everybody to hear about you. I want you to be a light to the nations, to everyone. And that's why we are Filipinos in here. And that's why we have everybody else in here. That's why we have Koreans. That's why we have Americans. That's why I have all people from all different places in here. Because Jesus came to seek and save the lost of all the nations. So Jesus is a prophet that is even greater than the prophet Elisha. Whereas Elisha rightly was concerned about the glory of God, salvation to him was absolutely secondary. And right now even, I want to tell you that compared to the glory of God, your salvation is used for the glory of God. But salvation has been accomplished by Jesus. And now that salvation is going out to the ends of the earth. Jesus is God's prophet. Look at what Jesus has done. This is the passage from Hebrews chapter 1. What was funny, I was sitting in Joshua's class today. By the way, Joshua did a great job. I don't mean to buff you up, keep yourself humble, but he still did a great job. And with the two kids that were in there, and I forget, was it Tristan who said, "Is Jesus a prophet?" Like that, or something like this, or maybe it was Joey. Joey said that, "Is Jesus a prophet?" And I'll answer that question for you right now. I knew you'd be here, and Joshua said, "Yeah, I think he could be," and he was right. The Bible calls him a prophet. He is the prophet to end all prophets, okay? He is the ultimate prophet, the Bible says. Long ago, and many times, and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, in whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom he created the world. This passage is so magnificent. I'm going to read the rest of it. But look at least what it's saying. It is saying that God spoke to the prophets in the past, but now he has given his definitive revelation. He spoke to the prophets in the past and told us that God is the God not only of Israel, but of everybody in the world. But now he has revealed himself in ways that has never happened before. He revealed himself in his Son, Jesus. I'll say to you very often, my dad's out there right now. If you line up everybody in that room, everybody, and I ask you to point out who my dad is, do you think you could do it? Oh, yeah. He's the best-looking guy over there. I'm just playing. Yeah, he looks a lot like me, okay? He looks a lot like me. And this is the way that the Bible describes Jesus, that he is the exact image of God, that Jesus more than anybody else has revealed to us what God is really like, Look at this. It goes further than this. Through whom he created the world. Jesus is the radiance of the glory. I love this language. The radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. Jesus upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, Jesus sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high. Isn't Jesus gorgeous? Jesus is magnificent here. Nothing short of that, right? Jesus represents God, displays God. Jesus is all the God that you and I will ever need to see because he displays him perfectly. And not only that, he has all the power in the world. I believe the he here is referring to Jesus, and that's why I said it that way. He upholds everything by just the word of his power. When he exercises his power to rule and to manage this world, no power is used up. I have a treadmill in my garage and I run on it for 5 minutes and I'm counting the seconds to see how much further I have to go till 10 and I'm exhausted by then. I went bowling with my brother David the other day and this dude is a monster. He bowled 8 games straight and he was ready to go for a few more. I was knocked out. Okay, if you use power, you lose power. In Jesus' case, he has all the power just by the word of his mouth. He upholds everything. Not only is Jesus God's definitive revelation, not only is Jesus God's prophet who tells the truth about God, he is God himself. Notice it says it was through Jesus that the Father created the world. Notice that it is Jesus that holds everything together. It is Jesus that holds this world in his awesome, powerful, listen, nail-pierced hands. This is the God we serve. This is the God we love. Jesus better than Elisha? Oh, absolutely. You can argue that Elisha was the greatest prophet to ever live. Because if you ask me, who do most people think is the greatest prophet? If they don't think about it and say Jesus, they'll say Elijah. But Elisha asked for a double portion of the spirit of Elijah, and the Bible indicates that he got it. So in some ways, and there are more miraculous works associated even with Elisha, I think. So Elisha, you could say he's the greatest. But Elisha was just a shadow. He was just a shadow of all that Jesus would be. Jesus is the prophet of God, but more than this, he is God himself. So what time then are you and I living in? See, radical Islam, they have this mantra that they cry out. And they say this: there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his prophet. Have you heard that before? There's no God but Allah and Muhammad is his prophet. What is this time that we are living in? It is a time that we proclaim there is no God but Jehovah. There is no God but Jehovah. And Jesus is his prophet. And not only is he his prophet, he is the Son of God and he is very God himself. This is the time, this is the message that we need to deliver to the world. The time in which we are living in, demands that we declare, that we be his spokesman in a way parallel to Jesus, hidden in Jesus. We become his mouthpieces, his prophets as it were, proclaiming the fact that our God is the true God. There is no other God. There are no would-be gods. Only our God is the true God, and he can be known. He can be known. He can be related to. He can be experienced in loving knowledge because of the revelation given to us in his son Jesus. This is the message that you and I are called to take in this generation, much more applicable than ever before. They may say that Allah is the only God and Muhammad is his prophet, but we have a much greater message to deliver, that Jehovah God, Jesus God, is the only God, and Jesus is his prophet who speaks through you and through me. He reveals himself in and among us. What time is it? It is time to proclaim this message. It is a time when, unlike the time of Elisha, the door of the gospel has been blown wide open. At that time, there was a clean division between the people of Israel and the people of the nations, and those two were not to be mixed. But in our times, Jesus, just like he was preaching in the beginning of his ministry, he accomplished the opening of the doors of heaven to everyone. Do you see? Do you see how much more significant and magnificent the message we have to deliver is than the one that even Elisha had to take into the world? A greater message than the message of the Old Testament prophets. So, what time is it? It is not a time, listen, for you to get caught up with the temporary things of this life. It is not a time, loved ones, for you to get caught up with the idols of this age. There's this guy, this fool named Ghazi that shows up at the end of the story. Did you notice him? Right? He is the servant of Elisha. There are other servants that show up here, right? Naaman has servants, right? And there was that servant girl who gave him the advice to go to Israel. There are those other servants who give him advice to go and wash in the Jordan, and they call him father, right? All of these things are happening here. But Ghazi, this guy, Ghazi, who is the servant of Elisha, of all people, of all the servants, he should have been the most holy, right? But this guy, he tries to deceive his master by lying to him. And after his master had refused all those gifts, all that silver, all that gold, all those clothing, what does he do? He goes behind his master's back and goes and gets the silver and gets the clothing. Really? Ghazi, really? What's wrong with Ghazi? There are a few different things that different kinds of faith that are displayed here. Naaman is a non-believer who comes to faith, right? Elisha is the ideal faith in a way, but Ghazi is a compromised faith. Ghazi is a guy who compromises his faith with everything that he can see. He lets the things that he sees distract him. He doesn't want to lose a single opportunity for him to gain something that is temporary, even in the light of the fact, even though he should have known so much better serving under Elisha. So he gets distracted by the things that he can see. He gets distracted by money. He gets distracted by pretty clothing. He gets distracted by video games. He gets distracted by movies. He gets distracted by all kinds of other things. But is this really a time for Ghazi to be so distracted, to have those things dominate his life? No, it is not. When Pastor Dan was leaving, and I was sorry to hear it, he said, sorry, Joey, I love you very much. Joey, the image of Joey looking at his iPod is going to be permanently grained in his head. That's what he said. And you know what? I hate that thing. You know why? Because Joey doesn't come and say hi anymore. Because before, he used to come and give me a hug. Hi, we had a good relationship. But every time I turn around and look at him, he's looking at this. I say, hi, Joey, and the best I get is, that's all I get. That's all I get. Really? Really? I don't know, I put Joey on the spot just because I know he can take it, and I think he enjoys the attention anyway. But I want to tell you guys, really, is this the time to be so caught up in just the things that you can see? Ultimately, when you stand before God, really, is he going to care very much what level you got to on Counter-Strike? Really? Huh? Is he going to care about that in heaven? Or the collection of seashells that you made? Or if you finished watching Blacklist, the entire series? Is he? Is he going to be that concerned about? Or is he going to be really concerned about whether or not you rescued Princess Peach? Is he? I don't think so. I don't think so. And I'm not here to just ridicule your habits and things like that. I mentioned Blacklist because I do like that show. And I know that some of you have that's fine. I play Slitherio, and things. But that's okay. But they shouldn't become a preoccupation in your life. Even the good things in your life, your relationship with somebody that you love should not become God things in your life. This is not the time. This is not the time to be so caught up in building your best life now that you lose sight of the one who holds that life in his hands and with whom you will spend all of eternity. Keep your eyes on the bigger picture. It is not time to get caught up with the things that you can touch and feel and experience. It is distracting because it's right there in your face, but please cultivate the habit of thinking biblically, Christianly, with a bigger mind that you were made for much more than this. You were created for much more enjoyment and pleasure than your video game or your video or your schoolwork. Success in your schoolwork can give you. And that pleasure has a name. His name is Jesus. Can I get an amen? Live for him. Have him put all of your pleasures and all of your other distractions into perspective and beat your distractions into submission to sing the praises of the glory of God. Do that. Whatever it's all right. Again, as I said, it's all right for you to watch movies, watch shows, play video games. But do it Christianly. See God's hand in it. Sometimes we watch movies here and we analyze it to see what aspect of God's mind is being brought out here, what would honor him and what displeases him. Do the extra work of thinking Christianly, being intentional about the time that you have been given. Don't ever talk about killing time. Don't kill time. Why would you want to kill time? Improve your time, the Bible says. This is a time in which we live. It is a time for you to know the Lord. Elisha was a person who knew the Lord and was able then to share that knowledge of God. Naaman, through this opportunity, got to know the Lord. He got to know the God of the universe. What time is it, everybody? It is time to know God. How did Naaman get to know God? Naaman was a proud man. You thought he was a pretty cool man, didn't you? I did. And this guy, he's like a manly man. He goes out into battles and he beats up everybody and he wins victory for his nations. He is at the right hand of the king. He is a powerful man. Not only that, he seems to be a humble man. He is able to be accessed by his servants. He's a loved man. His wife gives him good advice. His servants give him good advice. And his servants call him father. His slaves call him father. He must be a humble man. He himself must be a loving man. He must have been generous to them. He has good relationship with those people who are below him, right? But that's just a seeming humility. He was a proud man, and he was a man with a problem. He could have all of those possessions. He could have all of that love. He could have all those things that you and I would die for, in a sense. I had a friend of mine when we were growing up, and he was really into his body and having good style. And so this girl who was kind of clueless about working out and says, wow, is that a nice physique? That guy's arm with muscles bulging out, is that really good? And she asked that to this guy who was very much into that, but he was very young and didn't have much muscle. And he said this, I kid you not, Of course it is. You want to take my arm? Right? I would cut off this arm so you can make this one muscular. I'm going, idiot, right? Priorities. What in the world? So what if you have a muscular right arm if you don't have a left arm? Does that make any sense whatsoever? It's foolish, right? In much the same way, Naaman had all of these possessions, but he was a leper. He had a terminal disease, which reflected, the Bible calls it leprosy, but which reflects, the Bible is very consistent. The Bible calls leprosy unclean. So it points to a deeper issue. The deeper issue is our separation from God. The deeper issue is our sin. The deeper issue is our hatred of God, our willingness to accept anything else as my God, my financial, my family stability instead of God, allowing everything else to be a preoccupation. Right? All of that. And because of that, Naaman had to understand, and had to humble himself that the way to come to faith is through just reckless abandon, not leaning on my self-sufficiency, but accepting the sufficiency of God, not buying God's favor, but just purely accepting it. Is that you? Have you done that? If you are a Christian, at one point you have done it. You have found that nothing else matters if you don't have a relationship with God. And when you had Jesus, when you got Him, you found out that everything else can be gone, and yet you've got Jesus, and ultimately that's all that matters. Yes, you get distracted. Yes, you become like Ghazi. You see that nice shirt in the mall, and you gotta have it. It's a have to have, right? Or this or that and the other. You get distracted, I know. But at the core of your being, you know what it means to say that Jesus is my one and only ultimate satisfaction. And you're a Christian. And maybe some of you have never gotten to that place. Maybe religiosity for you also is just another means for emotional stability. It's all still about you. You're not blown away by what Jesus has done. This salvation, this forgiveness of sin has not become real to you. You don't really even think that you're a very bad person. I want to challenge you today. If you're like Naaman here, you got status, you got money, you got resources, you're doing okay, you still got your leprosy, you still have your separation from God, and everything that you enjoy will be gone in a moment, and you cannot be good with that. And that's because of your separation from God that only Jesus can mend. And He mends it as you recognize your sin, as you recognize your brokenness, His glorious cleanness and my absolute filth, and how in His perfect purity He is willing and able to accept us, to cleanse us, and to heal us. It's time to know the Lord. That's why I come back to Jesus every time, because it's all about knowing Him. And it is time to make Him known. Remember Pastor Danny said those two things. It is all about knowing God and making Him known. If you know Jesus, you want to make Him known. You want to make Jehovah known. And that's your calling right now. We need to have a mission mindset. We need to learn to go out into the world and take this goodness that God has given to us. You know, I'm not that crazy about one of the wonderful things about getting married is that women have better taste than men do in general, and my tastes got expanded. I was never very crazy about bread, but there is this one particular bread that my wife likes, and she loved it, and you know what she did? She shared it with me because she loves me, and she shared it with me. At first I couldn't really, it's okay, it's bread, you know. But then I thought about what she said and what she thought about why it has all of these nuances, and oh, it does. And I learned to like it. And it's one of my favorite breads now. What's my point? You love something, you want to share it. Is Jesus everything to you? You want to share Him. You want to tell the world about how Jesus saved you from a disease that was much worse than this leprosy. That cut to the core. Is going out too hard for you? There's another part of this story that's really pretty cool. Elisha never stepped foot out of Israel. What happened? Naaman came to him. What's happening to you right now? You're living in San Fernando Valley, most of you. This is a melting pot, where because we don't go out to the world, God brings the world to us. So we have an opportunity to reach out to people around us who are not like us. We have an opportunity, unlike most other places, to have our worship not be monolithic. It's not just one race. It's not just a Korean church. It's not just a Filipino church. It's not just a Mexican church. It's not just a white church. And it's a tragedy that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America. It shouldn't be that way. The church should be all about including races of all kinds. Why? Just because we want to be politically correct? Just because we don't want the government to come down on us or be accused of being racist? No, because the Bible shows us that God loves multiple races coming together and worshiping Him, because the diversity and the unity in the middle of the diversity expresses the love of the Trinity, which is so diverse, the Father, Son, and Spirit, but so united that He is one. And that's what we display. We have the opportunity to display. So I want to challenge you now, as we move on, and especially as we move on to our new place, that you would be mission-minded, that you would have a heart for the lost, that there are Naamans all over the world right now and right next to us who, without the gospel of Jesus, without knowing the true God, will spend an eternity separated from Him. Do you know God? Do you love Him? Then you will want to share Him. And I'm praying that God will give you the resources to do that. In your speech, in your actions, display Jesus, who must be seen. He is the only way that anybody will know about Him. Final point. You say, Pastor Paul, I compromise all the time. This past week I spent too much time on frivolous things. I have not discerned the time, and this coming week I'm afraid I'll go back to my same habits, same sins, same passions, being angry at the people that I love the most, losing my patience toward them. This evil thing just crawling up inside of me that I can't control. I'm afraid a guy is going to cut me off on the street and I'm going to lose it again. I'm going to curse him and curse his family. I'm going to do that. Okay, maybe hopefully I won't do it verbally, but I'll do it in my heart. You're afraid of that. We're full of compromise, aren't we? I want to give you two notes of grace. One that I had thought about bringing to you, and one that Pastor John mentioned this morning. One is this. Do you see that part where Naaman says, when I go into the temple of Rimmon and I hold the hand of my master and I bow down, may God forgive me of this. How many of you have been in places where you feel like, I know God is not pleased with this, but I'm going to blow it. I'm going to blow it again. I have not been able to. Maybe some of you have addictions you're afraid that you're going back to. All of those things. I'm afraid I'm going to go back again. I'm going to blow it again. And like I said, what did Elisha say? Go in peace. There was grace for those kinds of failures then. If so, then how much more now, since we have Jesus, who has provided for all of that, who knew all of it, all of your failures, all of your backbiting, all of your sin, all of your selfishness, and has provided payment for all of those things ahead of time. How much more now, if it was true then? One more thing, and this is one I didn't think about. This guy named Ghazi, we look at him and we say, what a fool. He has the best pastor in the whole world teaching him. He's an apprentice, for goodness sake. Elisha's apprentice. And yet he compromises and goes behind his master's back? Are you kidding me? And as a result, he ends up with this leprosy on his hands. What's interesting, what's fascinating is, a few chapters later, Ghazi shows up again. And he is giving advice to the king of Israel. And Pastor John says this. This is Pastor John's understanding of this, and I think he may be right. Isn't that evidence, he says, because lepers were ostracized. You couldn't be in the presence of lepers and stay clean. If you're a commoner, let alone the king, then what had to have happened? Because Ghazi, he had to have repented. Likely, he too got to go to the Jordan and bathe. And somehow, Elisha restored him too. And yes, our lives are full of compromise. But the fact that you are within the hearing of my voice is indication to me that God will not let you go. His grace will not give up on you. Heads bowed, eyes closed for just a minute.